When I think of World War II, one of the most striking images that comes to mind is the distant sound of engines roaring over the Pacific. It was a sound that, for many, meant hope. For others, it meant death. I always imagined what it must have been like to look at the sky and see a silvery dot approaching at an impossible speed, reflecting the sun, and realize that it wasn't a bird. It was an American fighter plane coming to hunt. Among all those legendary planes, one has always fascinated me more than any other. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an unusual-looking aircraft, with two tails and a central body that resembled the cockpit of a futuristic spaceship. But what's most intriguing is what its enemies thought. Japanese pilots had a special nickname for it, Ghost, and, in the end, that name said much more than it seemed. The P-38 emerged at a time when the world was about to change completely. In the late 1930s, while Europe plunged into chaos and the United States still tried to maintain neutrality, the American aeronautical industry began to test the limits of technology. The Army wanted a fighter capable of flying higher, faster, and for distances that seemed impossible at the time. The answer came from Lockheed, with a design that defied all known standards. The engineer Clarence Kelly Johnsony.RR, who would later become famous for creating aircraft such as the U-2 and the State Route 71 Blackbird, was the mastermind behind the P-38. He believed that the future of aviation lay in the combination of speed, power, and range, and lightning would be the embodiment of that. But what truly earned the P-38 the nickname Ghost wasn't just its exotic appearance or impressive speed. It was something more psychological. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a Japanese pilot in 1942, flying a light, agile but fragile fighter. Suddenly, without warning, something appears on the radar, or worse, emerges from nowhere among the clouds. A sharp metallic sound cuts through the air, and before you can react, a thunderclap of 20mm bullets and .50 caliber machine guns destroys your formation. You try to pursue the enemy, but it climbs, dives, and disappears. No trace, no sound, just silence. For many Japanese, that plane wasn't human. It was a ghostly being of the heavens, something that appeared and disappeared like a spirit of war. And that was the beginning of the legend. Whenever I think about the genius behind the P-38 Lightning, I'm impressed by how far ahead of its time it was. It was as if it came from the future. The project was born in 1937, when the United States Army challenged manufacturers to create an interceptor fighter capable of flying at over 560 kilometers per hour, reaching 6,000 meters in less than 6 minutes, and maintaining a long flight range. For most companies, that seemed impossible. But for Lockheed, it was an opportunity to prove that American military aviation could overcome any limit. That's when Clarence Kelly Johnson, a young engineer, not yet 30 years old, assembled a small team of brilliant minds and began designing something completely new. He refused to follow the patterns of traditional single-fuselage fighter jets. Instead, he created a bold design with 2 long rear beams, each containing a supercharged Allison V1710 engine, and between them, an Sealy central with the cockpit and armament concentrated in the nose. The result was an unmistakable silhouette. A veritable silver lightning bolt with 2 tails, something that looked more like a spaceship than a warplane. The first prototype, called XP-38, the Lightning, made its maiden flight in January 1939. And even with initial problems, it already showed that it was unlike anything that existed before. During testing, the Lightning reached unprecedented speeds for an American fighter. Unfortunately, the demonstration flight to the East Coast ended in tragedy when the engine froze and the prototype crashed before landing. But that accident did not diminish the brilliance of the project. On the contrary, it showed the immense potential of that machine. The Army became convinced that it was witnessing something revolutionary. Production began soon after, and each new version brought significant improvements. The P-38 stood out for being heavy, robust, and extremely stable. Unlike other fighter jets, it had 3 retractable wheels, hydraulic controls, and a turbocharging system allowed it to fly at extremely high altitudes, where few enemies could reach. The cockpit was spacious and the pilot had almost total visibility, essential in aerial combat. Furthermore, the armament concentrated at the front, without needing to align shots from different wings, gave the Lightning devastating accuracy. A single short shot was enough to destroy an enemy fighter. But the real difference of the P-38 was in its flight range. It could travel enormous distances, crossing oceans, islands, and mountains, making it ideal for the Pacific theater of operations. When the United States fully entered the war after Pearl Harbor, the P-38 was ready to be sent to the front lines. And soon, the skies of the Pacific would witness the birth of a legend. I like to imagine what the first pilots who took off in that plane felt. They didn't know they were making history. For them, the Lightning was just a new war machine. But for the enemy, it would be something quite different. Soon, the P-38 would begin to appear where no one expected it, attacking with surgical precision and disappearing before Japanese radars could react. It was at that moment that Lightning turned into a ghost, and the name Lightning, meaning lightning in English, began to make even more sense. When the P-38 finally arrived on the Pacific front, the world was already ablaze. It was the beginning of 1942, and the Japanese dominated vast areas, from the Philippines to the Solomon Islands. The empire of the rising sun seemed unstoppable. Japanese pilots flew confidently, especially aboard the Mitsubishi A6M-0A light, agile fighter, deadly in close combat. But in that same sky, a new presence was beginning to emerge, and it would change the balance of power. I like to imagine the first time a group of Zeros spotted the P-38. Two engines roaring in unison, a metallic silhouette cutting across the horizon with a speed and posture that seemed defiant. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to face something they couldn't comprehend. The first operational use, the first major P-38 victory in the Pacific, occurred on August 9, 1942. When two Lightning fighters shot down a Japanese Kawanishi H-6K seaplane over the Aleutian Islands, Alaska. It was the first downing of an American fighter operating on continental U.S. soil during the war. It seemed like an isolated incident, but it was only the beginning. Soon after, P-38s began to be deployed en masse to the Southwest Pacific, a region of vast distances and treacherous weather conditions, perfect for exploiting the Lightning's range and endurance. Bases in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands became the stage for its first major victories. The American pilots quickly realized that the P-38 was a hunting and escape weapon ideal for ambushes. It could ascend and dive at impressive speeds, taking advantage of its power and unique aerodynamics. In direct combat, the Japanese Zero still had an advantage in maneuverability, but the Lightning compensated with firepower and armor. Its 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm Hispano cannon concentrated in the nose made it a long-range predator. A short burst was enough to dismantle an enemy in midair. But what impressed the Japanese most was not just the destructive power. It was the way the P-38 appeared and disappeared. Many accounts from Japanese pilots described the Lightning appearing out of nowhere, like a metallic shape descending from the clouds or coming directly into the sun, making it almost impossible to spot in time. The sound of the two engines in sync created a strange acoustic effect, echoing off the mountains and obscuring the direction from which the attack was coming. To those down below, it really seemed as if the Americans had created an invisible plane, a spectral presence that only revealed itself when it was already too late. In several battles, P-38s would suddenly appear, shoot down enemies, and disappear before any reinforcements could react. This ability to attack and vanish quickly began to generate rumors among the Japanese. Some believed that the American pilots used some kind of spiritual camouflage. Others said the plane had an otherworldly sound, impossible to identify. And so was born the nickname that would forever mark the P-38, the ghost of the skies. What's most fascinating is that this nickname didn't just come from fear, it also came from admiration. Many Japanese pilots deeply respected those who faced the P-38 and returned alive. It was a silent acknowledgement that they were facing something superior. And the Americans, of course, loved this reputation. They knew that every time the enemy heard that double roar in the air, a feeling of dread gripped the battlefield. The P-38 was only beginning its journey. Soon, it would become the eye and fist of the Allied air forces in the Pacific, participating in missions that seemed impossible. But before that, he would still have to prove that he could be more than just a good fighter jet. He would need to become a strategic weapon capable of changing the course of the war. When I began studying the P-38 Lightning in depth, I realized that understanding its reputation as a ghost required looking beyond the battles. It was necessary to understand its almost magical engineering. What made the P-38 so different from other aircraft was not just its unusual appearance, but what was happening inside him. It was a combination of brute force, innovation, and genius that seemed to belong to a later era of aviation. And for the Japanese of that time, it was simply incomprehensible. The P-38's heart was beating twice as fast, two Allison V1710 engines, each with more than 1,400 horsepower. They were equipped with turboalimentadors. General Electric, a highly advanced technology for the late 1930s. This meant the Lightning could maintain its performance even at extreme altitudes, where the thin air caused other aircraft to lose power. While enemy fighters began to choke above 7,000 meters, the P-38 climbed like a rocket, breaking through the cloud layer and becoming virtually unreachable. That's why the Japanese called it airplane that comes from the clouds. They simply couldn't fight at such high altitudes. Furthermore, the design of tails, it wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It served to stabilize flight at high speed and ensure control even during violent dives. The central body, where the pilot sat, was armored and aerodynamically shaped like a bullet. The aluminum structure was lightweight yet strong, and the aircraft could withstand extremely high G-forces during maneuvers that would destroy more fragile aircraft. The tricycle landing gear with a front wheel offered stability on the ground, a rarity among fighters of the time. Everything in the P-38 seemed designed with an almost futuristic logic. Another detail that has always impressed me is the concentrated weaponry. Not unlike other fighter jets, which had machine guns distributed across the wings, requiring convergence of fire at a specific distance. The Lightning fired all weapons in a straight line. 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns and a 20mm Hispano M2 cannon made the aircraft a veritable flying machine gun. This configuration allowed the pilot to hit the target with deadly precision, even at long distances. In combat, a short burst was enough to completely dismantle an enemy aircraft. The P-38's cockpit also reflected this attention to detail. The instrument panel was spacious, the controls well distributed, and the panoramic visibility gave the pilot a huge advantage in combat. There was room for long missions, and the oxygen system allowed for hours of flight at altitudes where no other Allied fighter could safely operate. Many pilots said that, even after long hours of flight, the Lightning was still comfortable and stable, something unthinkable for fighter planes of the time. This combination of range, altitude, and power made the P-38 the first truly strategic fighter jet of the United States. But all this technology came at a price. The Lightning required constant maintenance, specific replacement parts, and highly trained mechanics. Its turbocharging system, for example, was sensitive and needed meticulous adjustments. In tropical climates, such as those of the Pacific, the heat and humidity made the work of ground crews difficult. Even so, the results in combat compensated for every drop of sweat. The P-38 could do what no other aircraft could: fly hundreds of kilometers over the ocean, attack and return, without relying on aircraft carriers or advanced runways. And it was precisely this capability that changed the course of the war. The Lightning began to be used not only as a fighter jet, but as bomber escort, photo reconnaissance aircraft, and even long-range interceptor. It was too fast for enemy bombers and had enough fuel to protect formations all the way to the target and back. In the skies over the Pacific, the P-38 became a constant, almost omnipresent presence. The Japanese began calling it Enai Kenjo no Rei, the spirit of two tails. Poetic nickname, but also terrifying. They weren't fighting just any plane. They were fighting against the engineering of the impossible. Every machine, no matter how advanced, needs a soul to come to life. And the P-38 Lightning had its souls in extraordinary men. Pilots who not only mastered the aircraft, but became living legends of the skies. I always found it fascinating how the P-38 seemed to attract a certain type of aviator. Fearless, technically skilled, and daring. It wasn't enough to have good aim. You needed nerves of steel, patience, and an almost instinctive understanding of the machine. These men became the personification of the ghost that the Japanese so feared. One of the names that impresses me the most is that of Richard Ira Bong. He was a country boy, born on a farm in Wisconsin, and had a shy smile that contrasted with what he did in the air. Bong enlisted young and quickly distinguished himself with his extraordinary skill. When he began flying the P-38 in the Pacific, it seemed he was born to fly it. His calmness under pressure was legendary. He attacked precisely without wasting ammunition. By the end of the war, Bong had amassed 40 confirmed wins, becoming the top American ace of World War II. For many, he was the true spirit of the Lightning. His fighting style reflected the plane itself. Fast, silent, deadly. Another name that deserves mention is that of Thomas B. McGuire, a companion and friend of Bong, and a friendly rival in kill statistics, had a more aggressive temperament, and his flying style was daring, risky, sometimes bordering on the impossible. He mastered the P-38 like few others, exploiting every technical detail to extract maximum performance. McGuire ended the war with 38 confirmed wins. He flew just 2 flights behind Bong and became a symbol of courage. Tragically, he lost his life in combat trying to save a comrade. His death further reinforced the heroic aura of the P-38 pilots, men who seemed to defy even death itself. But it wasn't just those two that left their mark. The P-38 was the fighter of choice for many American aces, such as Charles McDonald, J.T. Robbins, Gerald Johnson, and Dick Bong Jr., among others. They all had something in common. They made the Lightning an extension of their bodies. They blindly trusted the aircraft's capabilities and knew how to exploit its power to ambush enemies. The classic strategy was the boom and zoom, a rapid dive from high altitudes, firing a deadly burst, and climbing again before the enemy could react. It was the perfect strike. Fast, precise, and devastating. The Japanese never managed to find an effective answer to it. Enemy pilots, in many accounts, described the P-38s as silver demons. Some said they emerged directly from the sun, a common American tactic, using sunlight for visual camouflage. Others claimed the sound of the two engines created a kind of metallic wail that chilled the blood. It wasn't just physical fear, it was psychological fear. The Japanese began to believe that the pilots of these planes were supernaturally trained, or that the Americans had some kind of hidden radar guiding them to their targets. In reality, it was simply the lethal combination of technology, strategy, and human instinct. These pilots, through their victories and sacrifices, transformed the P-38 into more than just a weapon. They transformed it into a myth, a symbol of air dominance and technological superiority. And the curious thing is that many of them, upon returning from the war, spoke of the aircraft with a mixture of respect and affection, almost as if it were a battle companion. They said that the Lightning forgave mistakes, that it saved lives, that it never let them down. One pilot even stated, "If I had to fly alone against the world, I would choose the P-38." Simple words, but powerful. The truth is that these men didn't just pilot a fighter jet. They embodied the legend of the Ghost. What was a terrifying apparition to the Japanese was a symbol of courage and hope to the Americans. And as the battles progressed, the P-38 would become the protagonist of increasingly risky missions, which demanded not only skill, but an almost blind trust in the machine and in oneself. The more I study the P-38 Lightning's missions in the Pacific, the more I understand that the nickname Ghost didn't just come from its appearance or sound, but from brilliant tactics that American pilots developed to fully exploit the potential of that machine. It was as if every detail of the plane had been designed to confuse, deceive, and terrify the enemy. The P-38 didn't just fight. He did it with a coldness that left the Japanese pilots completely disoriented. The secret lay in understanding the fundamental difference between the Lightning and the Zero. The Japanese fighter was agile but light and vulnerable. The American one was heavy, fast, and much more robust. While the Zero could make tight turns, the P-38 dominated the comate vertical. He would ascend, dive, and use gravity as an ally. It was a tactic called boom and zoom. The American pilot maintained a higher altitude, observed the enemy below, and at the right moment, dove at high speed, firing a precise burst of machine gun and cannon fire. Then, without hesitation, he pulled back on the control stick and climbed again, disappearing into the clouds. In a matter of seconds, the attack was complete, and the enemy didn't even have time to react. It was a quick, silent, and deadly blow. To those on the other side, it truly seemed like an attack by an invisible spirit. The Japanese pilots, accustomed to long battles and acrobatic maneuvers, couldn't keep up. They tried to spin, turn, or dive after the P-38s, but quickly lost contact. The Lightning's two engines gave it a acceleration force absurd. He could escape in a straight line and disappear in a few seconds. Furthermore, the turbocharger allowed the plane, maintaining power at altitudes where the Zero simply didn't work well. The Japanese began to realize that there was no point in going up to confront the Ghost. Up there, it reigned supreme. And when they were descending back down, Lightning was already waiting, ready for another lightning-fast dive. Another frightening tactic was the clever use Ofson and Cloud's American pilots knew that flying against the sun, the glare blinded enemies. Therefore, they always positioned themselves to attack from the sun's direction, making it completely difficult to see. It was common to hear Japanese reports describing the P-38 as a light descending from the sky and then disappearing. The sound of the engines also contributed to the confusion. Since there were two, the noise mixed and echoed irregularly, making it impossible to determine where it came from. There were times when the enemy thought the sound was coming from the left, when, in fact, the plane was emerging from the right. This acoustic confusion, combined with speed and altitude, reinforced the belief that the Lightning, it was no ordinary machine, but something almost supernatural. The P-38 also distinguished itself in interception and reconnaissance operations, in which stealth was essential. Its pilots often flew alone, covering vast oceanic areas, finding enemy formations and striking surgically. When missions required total silence, the Lightning reduced engine speed and glided with its propellers almost at idle. To those below, it simply appeared, without warning, without noise. A Japanese pilot even reported that the P-38 was born from the wind. This poetic description ended up spreading among the units, further strengthening the myth of the American Ghost. But none of this would have been possible without the pilots' rigorous training. They learned to take advantage of every technical advantage, every peculiarity of the aircraft. They knew when to dive, when to escape, when to use speed to survive. Many said that flying the P-38 was like dancing with gravity, a constant balance between control and chaos. And it was precisely this combination of technique, tactics, and audacity that made Lightning so lethal. When I read Japanese accounts from that time, I realized the psychological impact of these tactics. Some pilots reported that upon seeing the metallic glint of a P-38 in the distance, their hearts would race. They knew that, in a few seconds, it could be right above them. Others confessed that they avoided combat at very high altitudes, fearing the double shadows, a reference to the image of the Lightning's two tails appearing through the clouds. For them, seeing those two silver tails was a sign of bad omen. The Ghost was coming. These strategies transformed the P-38 not just into a fighter jet, but an invisible predator, who attacked when he wanted and disappeared when he decided. And it was precisely this unpredictability that would make him the perfect weapon for one of the most daring operations of the entire war, the hunt for the man who planned Pearl Harbor. If there is one episode from World War II that perfectly demonstrates the power and precision of the P-38 Lightning, it is the legendary Operation Vengeance. I've always been fascinated while studying this mission. Imagine the tension of knowing that the enemy you're going to attack isn't just any officer, but the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He was respected and feared, a brilliant strategist. And here was the chance to change the course of the war in the Pacific. The P-38 would be the perfect tool for this almost impossible mission. It was April 18, 1943. A group of American pilots received precise intelligence information about the route Yamamoto would take on his inspection flight between Bougainville and Belle-Isle in the Solomon Islands. The distance was enormous, more than 600 kilometers round trip over the open sea with no possibility of refueling. The risk was extremely high, and that is precisely why the P-38 was chosen. Exceptional range, speed, and firepower concentrated in the nose. No other fighter jet could accomplish that mission with such precision. I imagine myself in that moment, looking at the map, feeling the cold wind of the altitude, knowing that the life of each pilot depended on every mile flown. The pilots involved, including Thomas McGuire E. Rex Barber, they needed to fly a low trajectory to avoid detection and climb only at the exact moment of attack. The timing was critical. Every second of delay could mean failure or death. I can visualize the formation cutting through the blue sky, two silvery tails reflecting the sun, moving almost silently, while the enemy believed they were safe. When the correct route was hit, the lightnings climbed in a calculated dive and attacked. The result was devastating. Yamamoto was shot down, his plane exploded, and the mission was completed without American losses. An action so precise it seemed like something out of a movie script and, for the Japanese, a true miracle or a supernatural act. What deeply impresses me is how the P-38 pilots coordinated intelligence, skill, and technology. It didn't attack haphazardly. Every maneuver, every dive and climb was meticulously planned, using maps, speed, altitude, and angles of attack. The operation showed that the Lightning wasn't just an air superiority fighter. It was also a strategic weapon capable of hitting extremely high-value targets with surgical precision. And this mission made it clear that the Ghost of the Skies was not just a legend. It was real, deadly, and completely unpredictable. Beyond the military impact, Operation Vengeance had a huge psychological effect. Among the Japanese pilots, stories began to spread about planes that appeared out of nowhere, attacked with precision, and disappeared like shadows. The P-38 gained a reputation for being unbeatable, and the men who flew it became true heroes for the Americans. For me, that episode has always been the perfect synthesis of everything that makes the P-38 so fascinating. Speed, power, range, precision, and an almost supernatural aura that left the enemy speechless. But Operation Vengeance was just one of countless missions in which the Lightning demonstrated its superiority. Every engagement in the Pacific, every interception over remote islands, every deadly dive contributed to the myth of the ghost plane. And the more I study these actions, the more I realize that the P-38 was not just an airplane, it was a symbol of the perfect combination of technology and human courage. Something the Japanese would never forget. If there's one thing that has always impressed me about the P-38 Lightning, it's its ability to flying distances that seemed impossible at the time. While other fighter jets were restricted to short missions close to bases, the Lightning could cross oceans, traverse isolated islands, and remain operational for hours on end. This was not just a tactical advantage, it was a decisive factor that transformed the Pacific theater. And for the Japanese pilots, this only reinforced the feeling of facing a ghost that emerged from where no one expected it. The P-38's range reached an impressive 200 kilometers, depending on fuel load and flight conditions. To give you an idea, this meant it could take off from a relatively safe base and reach any strategic point on the scattered islands of the Pacific, attack enemy targets, and return without relying on aircraft carriers or forward runways. In a territory where every kilometer was surrounded by danger and uncertainty, this capability gave the Americans unprecedented flexibility, allowing them to attack Japanese command centers, naval convoys, and airfields with precision and speed. And the psychological impact of that was enormous. The Japanese never expected a fighter jet to appear out of nowhere, attacking and disappearing in regions they deemed safe. Enemy pilot accounts describe planes appearing early in the morning or at dusk, taking advantage of sunlight and altitude, launching quick attacks and disappearing before any reaction could be organized. This combination of range and unpredictability made the Lightning, for them, an almost supernatural presence in the skies, fueling stories of ghosts that only appeared when they wanted to. The P-38 also distinguished itself in missions of strategic recognition. Equipped with high-resolution cameras, it could fly over enemy territory and map enemy islands, ports, and positions hundreds of kilometers from its base. This provided vital information for planning subsequent offensives. And, when necessary, it could switch to direct attack, transforming itself into a multi-purpose war machine, fast and lethal. For the Japanese, there was no safe place in the Pacific, and that was part of the psychological terror that the Phantom caused. Another fascinating aspect was the Lightning's ability to operate at extreme altitudes and in adverse weather conditions. The two turbocharged Allison V-1710 engines allowed for long flights without loss of performance. And the aircraft's robust design ensured it could withstand prolonged combat and enemy attacks, something few Allied fighters could do. It was as if the P-38 had been designed for master all types of scenarios, from clear skies to tropical storms over the Pacific. I like to imagine American pilots looking at the map before each mission, knowing they would need to fly hundreds of kilometers over an inhospitable ocean, relying entirely on the aircraft and their own skill. Each flight was a mixture of courage, calculation, and absolute trust in the machine. And it was this combination that transformed the P-38 into a predator of the skies and a living legend. Each successfully completed mission reinforced the myth of the Phantom, a plane that appeared where no one expected it and disappeared without a trace, leaving only destruction and fear in its wake. The P-38's range, more than any other feature, symbolizes something that has always fascinated me. The ability of technology to transform the course of war. He didn't just shoot down enemies. He redefined the concept of range, strategy, and airspace control, making the Pacific skies a place where American unpredictability reigned. For the Japanese, this wasn't just combat. It was an almost supernatural experience, reinforcing the aura of the ghost that would become immortal. Something that has always fascinated me about the P-38 Lightning, besides its speed, range, and power, is the unique sound it produced in the Heavens. Two engines roaring in perfect synchrony created an acoustic signature that was impossible to mistake. For enemy pilots, this sound was more than just engine noise. It was a warning of impending death and a significant part of the Lightning's reputation as a ghost. I like to imagine a Japanese pilot flying over the Pacific Islands, trying to locate the enemy by sound. The metallic roar of the P-38 confused their perception of distance and direction, leaving them vulnerable and apprehensive even before any combat began. The secret lay in the combination Oftuo Allison V-1710 engines. Each engine had a turbocharger that increased power at high altitudes. When the P-38 accelerated to dive or attack, the two engines, emitting almost identical sounds, created an echo effect that confused the enemy's orientation. Many Japanese accounts describe the sensation of hearing the plane approaching, but without being able to determine where it came from. It was as if the ghost were there, gliding through the skies, appearing from one direction and attacking from another. This psychological effect was as powerful as lightning's own firepower. Furthermore, American pilots learned to use sound as a tactical tool. They adjusted the engine power to visually and audibly deceive the enemy. In some situations, the pilots would silently dive at low altitude, almost without the predominant roar, and suddenly emerge in surprise attacks. It was a way of manipulating the opponent's perception, making the Lightning even more unpredictable and lethal. Each burst of machine gun and cannon fire accompanied by that double roar created a sensation of inevitable assault, leaving the Japanese with no time to react. The psychological effect of the P-38's sound spread rapidly among Japanese pilots. Some even reported that just hearing the engines on the horizon was enough to paralyze them, causing them to lose concentration and even the coordination of their maneuvers. It was a mixture of fear and respect. For them, that metallic sound was synonymous with destruction, and associating it with the ghost became natural. It wasn't just a physical attack. It was a psychological weapon, a sonic signature that announced something deadly was about to happen. Another interesting detail is that this effect also worked in favor of the Americans themselves. Knowing that the enemy was confused by the sound, the P-38 pilots could carry out coordinated, riskier attacks, confident that the element of surprise protected them. It was a perfect example of how the aircraft's technology and the pilot's skill combined to create a perfect match. To create an almost supernatural strategic advantage. It wasn't luck, it wasn't a myth. It was the result of engineering, training, and combat intelligence. When I think of the P-38, I can't separate the plane from the sound it made. Those twin engines roaring through the skies became as iconic as its twin-tailed silhouette. And it's precisely this combination of power, range, precision, and even psychological sound which makes the Lightning one of the most feared fighter planes of World War II. For the Japanese, every time they heard that roar, they knew they were about to face the ghost, and often they wouldn't survive the encounter. While studying Japanese accounts of the P-38 Lightning, I realized something fascinating. The aircraft was not just a physical threat, but a constant psychological presence. Many Japanese pilots described the Lightning as something impossible to fight. It was almost supernatural. For them, confronting the P-38 was facing a mixture of technological skill, military strategy, and something they couldn't comprehend. It's hard to imagine what those men felt, flying over the Pacific, surrounded by enemies and clouds, and suddenly a metallic beam appeared on the horizon. For them, it was like facing a ghost. Reports from Japanese air units show that the impact of the P-38 went far beyond material losses. Some pilots confessed that, upon hearing the double roar of the engines, they were already experiencing panic and anxiety, without knowing exactly where the attack was coming from. Others reported that the plane seemed to emerge from the sun or clouds, making it impossible to calculate its trajectory. This created tactical confusion, and often enemy formations became disorganized even before combat began. The Lightning didn't just need to shoot down enemies, he morally destroyed his rival pilots. Interestingly, there was also a deep respect. Many accounts describe how, even wounded or at a disadvantage, the Japanese pilots recognized the skill of the Americans and the effectiveness of the Lightning. They knew they were facing not just an airplane, but a perfectly designed machine, piloted by extremely well-trained men. One Japanese commander even wrote that the P-38 was a creature that could only exist in the imagination of the gods of war. This respect mixed with fear created a legendary aura around Lightning, reinforcing its reputation as a ghost that attacked unpredictably and disappeared without a trace. The perception of the enemy was reinforced by specific instances of American pilots using innovative tactics. Vertical dives, sun attacks, the combination of speed and concentrated weaponry. All of this created a devastating psychological effect for the Japanese. It seemed as if the aircraft had a consciousness of its own, choosing the right moment to attack and disappear before any reaction was possible. Many admitted that they preferred to avoid direct combat with the Lightning and focus on more vulnerable fighters, such as the P-40 or the A-6M-20 light patrol aircraft. Fear of the P-38 spread rapidly, and the aircraft's reputation became as important as its actual effectiveness. This psychological impact had remarkable strategic effects. The fear of the P-38 made the Japanese more cautious, altering routes and even avoiding combat, which gave the Americans a significant tactical advantage. Each Lightning victory was, therefore, not only a physical kill, but a blow to enemy morale. And that is precisely what makes the Ghost so fascinating. It attacked in every way, not only with machine guns and cannons, but also with intelligence and presence in the sky, leaving opponents in a constant state of alert. As I continue to study the psychological effects of Lightning, I realized that this combination of technology, tactics, and emotional impact, it was crucial to its legendary fame. The P-38 was not just an advanced fighter. It was a full weapon capable of destroying enemies both physically and mentally. It cemented its position as one of the most iconic and feared aircraft of World War II. And it is this mixture of fear and respect that makes its history so fascinating even today. One of the things that fascinates me most about the P-38 Lightning is that it wasn't limited to a single combat role. Unlike many fighters of the time, designed only for dogfights or short missions, the Lightning was a true multifunctional machine capable of adapting to diverse tasks in the Pacific theater. This versatility not only amplified the aircraft's military impact, but also reinforced the ghost aura that so terrified its enemies. In addition to hunting enemies in the skies, the P-38 excelled in photographic reconnaissance missions equipped with high-resolution cameras. It could fly over enemy islands, ports, and strategic bases, collecting vital information to plan future attacks. These missions demanded absolute precision and a combination of patience and skill, because pilots needed to fly low, sometimes facing anti-aircraft fire, and still ensure sharp and complete photos. The idea of an aircraft that could suddenly appear, record every detail of enemy territory, and disappear unseen only fueled the legend of the Ghost. Another critical function of the P-38 was to bomber escort in the vast Pacific. Keeping bombers protected was a complex task. They often traveled hundreds of kilometers over the ocean, vulnerable to enemy attack. The Lightning proved perfect for this mission. With its exceptional range and superior speed, it could accompany the bombers from the beginning to the end of the mission, attacking enemy fighters that tried to intercept them. It was impressive to think that a single P-38 could maintain a reliable air defense line throughout the entire attack trajectory. And of course, Lightning was devastating in direct attacks against land and naval targets. Its nose-mounted guns allowed it to hit ships, depots, airfields, and convoys with impressive precision. Many American pilots reported feeling a kind of tactical pleasure in realizing that each shot from the P-38 was accurate enough to cause effective destruction with minimal effort. It was a combination of technology and skill that transformed each mission into a demonstration of superiority. This versatility had a direct effect on the enemy. The Japanese never knew exactly what to expect. The P-38 could appear as a direct combat fighter, as a reconnaissance shadow, or as an aerial predator protecting bombers. This unpredictability created a constant feeling of vulnerability for enemy pilots. Each appearance of a Lightning was a cause for tension. They didn't know if they would face air attacks, bomber interception, or photographic espionage. I always think that this ability to perform multiple functions without compromising performance was one of the P-38's greatest qualities. It not only destroyed enemies, but changed the way of fighting in the Pacific. It offered Americans strategic options that no other fighter could provide. It was the perfect balance of power, precision, and adaptability. And every time the Lightning went into action, it reinforced the legend of the plane that appeared out of nowhere, attacked, and disappeared, the true ghost of the skies of World War II. In studying the impact of the P-38 Lightning, I realized that it stood out not only for its power or range. One of its most effective weapons was, in fact, the enemy's Mindy. Always found it fascinating how an aircraft's reputation could become as powerful as its physical capabilities. The Lightning wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of fear, respect, and unpredictability, and the Japanese soon came to fear him almost as if he were a supernatural being. The psychological effect of the P-38 began with its distinctive appearance: twin tails, tapered nose, metallic profile reflecting the sun, and was reinforced by its combat behavior. It would appear suddenly, strike with deadly precision, and disappear before the enemy could react. For many Japanese pilots, facing the Lightning was not simply fighting. It was a terrifying experience which shook the confidence, training, and even the planning of missions. And like any myth, each account exaggerated the feats somewhat, adding to the legend of the plane that came from nowhere and disappeared like a ghost. This reputation spread rapidly. Some Japanese accounts described the P-38 as an entity that emerged directly from the sun or clouds, attacked, and disappeared. Others spoke of the metallic roar of its two engines, which confused the pilot's sense of direction and frightened them even before they engaged in combat. For them, each encounter with the Lightning was unpredictable and potentially deadly. Psychological fear. It functioned as a form of almost invisible warfare. Without firing a single shot, the P-38 was already undermining the enemy's confidence. At the same time, this mythical aura inspired the American pilots themselves. Flying a P-38 meant entering a legendary machine, feeling that they were piloting something unique and capable of overcoming any challenge. I always found that incredible, the combination of technology, human skill, and psychology transforming the same aircraft into a physical and mental weapon. Allied morale increased with each Lightning victory, while Japanese morale decreased in the face of the unknown. This duality made the P-38 not just a fighter but a living psychological warfare tool. And what's most interesting is that the reality behind the myth was equally impressive. Every aspect of the aircraft, twin engines, concentrated armament, exceptional range, speed, and stability, contributed to making the legend true. It wasn't luck nor exaggeration. It was such an efficient machine that the rumors seemed almost inevitable. The P-38 was indeed the ghost, and the psychological accounts only confirmed its effectiveness. This combination of myth and reality made the Lightning enduring symbol of World War II. He demonstrated that technological superiority combined with human strategy could create something that transcended logic. An aircraft that terrified the enemy even before firing, that became a legend while fulfilling its missions, and that, for many, seemed to appear out of nowhere. And it is precisely this duality between myth and reality that makes the P-38 one of the most fascinating stories in military aviation. Looking back at the final years of the Second World War, I am always struck by the decisive role that the P-38 Lightning played. The aircraft, which was previously just another experimental fighter jet, has established itself as a true hero of the Pacific skies, and at the same time as a living legend feared and respected by his enemies. The evolution of lightning during the war is fascinating because it shows how the combination of technology, strategy, and human courage can transform a machine into a myth. By the end of the war, the P-38 had become an essential part of American operations. It served as an air superiority fighter, bomber escort, strategic interceptor, and even a reconnaissance aircraft. Its versatility became critical to Allied efforts in distant regions such as the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. And it wasn't just its physical presence that mattered. The fear it inspired in the Japanese spread rapidly. Enemy pilots knew that a Lightning could appear out of nowhere, attack with precision, and disappear before any defense could be organized. Balance between power and reputation, it transformed the P-38 into an almost mythical presence in the skies. What always impresses me is the number of American pilots who achieved extraordinary feats aboard the Lightning. Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, whom I've already mentioned, are the most famous examples, but dozens of other aces amassed impressive victories. Many of these pilots survived extremely dangerous missions, relying entirely on the aircraft's ability to bring them home. The P-38 became, for them, a reliable battle partner, something that transcended the simple machine. It was almost an extension of his own skill and instinct. At the same time, the war was drawing to a close and new threats were emerging. The Japanese began to adapt their tactics, creating strategies to deal with the Lightning, although these adaptations often came too late. The myth of the Ghost persisted, reinforced by the American pilots themselves, who recounted their victories in detail, spreading stories of almost supernatural attacks. For me, this aspect is fascinating. The P-38 gained power not only from the destruction it caused, but with the aura it left in the enemy's mind. In the final analysis, it's clear that the P-38 was much more than a fighter plane. It was a symbol of innovation, courage, and strategy. An aircraft that combined cutting-edge technology with the ability to transform the enemy's psychology. A hero to the Americans and a ghost to the Japanese, the Lightning went down in history as one of the most feared and respected machines of World War II. And the most impressive thing is that, even decades later, it still fascinates us. What began as a daring project by Clarence Kelly Johnson became a living legend of military aviation. When reflecting on the P-38 Lightning, I can't help but think of the lasting impact he had on aviation after World War II. More than just a legendary fighter jet, the Lightning became a technological and tactical innovation model, influencing decades of aeronautical development. I am always fascinated to realize how a machine designed for immediate combat left valuable lessons for future generations of engineers, pilots, and military strategists. The design of the P-38, especially the configuration tails attached to a central fuselage, inspired concepts of stability, aerodynamics, and engine layout in later aircraft. Many ideas that seemed daring at the time, such as concentration of weaponry in the nose for greater accuracy, they were analyzed and adapted to models of modern fighter jets and attack aircraft. The Lightning showed that innovation doesn't need to follow traditional patterns. Sometimes, audacity and ingenuity create unparalleled results. Furthermore, your operational versatility, the P-38 profoundly influenced the concept of multi-purpose aircraft. It wasn't just a fighter. It acted as an interceptor, bomber escort, reconnaissance aircraft, and even an attack plane against strategic targets. This multifunctionality served as inspiration for Cold War fighters when aircraft needed to perform various types of missions without compromising performance. The Lightning proved that an aircraft could be fast, powerful, and precise while still maintaining the range and endurance for long missions. Another important legacy lies in combat psychology and aerial warfare. The P-38 demonstrated the power of combining advanced technology with psychological strategies, such as surprise, speed, and intimidating appearance. This concept of creating a ghost effect on the enemy, of dominating not only physically but also mentally, began to be studied in subsequent military training. Pilots and strategists realized that aerial warfare is not just about weaponry, but about intelligence, perception, and control of airspace. The impact of Lightning also extended to aviation culture. American and Allied pilots viewed the P-38 as an extension of their own abilities, a reliable partner in combat. This relationship between man and machine became a benchmark in post-war aviation, influencing how new aircraft were designed to offer reliability, ergonomics, and trust to the pilots. The Lightning taught us that an airplane can be more than just metal and engines. It can be a symbol of courage and ingenuity. In short, the P-38 Lightning became legendary not only for its combat victories, but also for legacy he left behind, technological, strategic, and psychological. It transformed the way we think about fighter jets, tactics, and the relationship between pilot and machine. Every time I study its history, I realize that the ghost of the skies did not disappear with the end of the war. It remains alive in the lessons it left for all who came after. While studying the history of the P-38 Lightning, I am always moved to realize that its fame transcended the battlefield and took root in the collective memory. The aircraft left a profound mark not only for its military effectiveness, but for the cultural and emotional impact it caused. Pilots, historians, and aviation enthusiasts continue to remember the ghost of the skies as a symbol of innovation, courage, and legend. Stories from pilots who flew the Lightning still circulate among veterans and researchers. Many report that the aircraft had a personality of its own, almost like a reliable combat partner. Each successful mission reinforced the respect and admiration for the Lightning, and these accounts have become part of books, documentaries, and exhibits in aviation museums. It's fascinating to see how the P-38, which emerged as a daring project in the 1930s, gained an almost mythical aura thanks to the combination of its technical capabilities and the heroic acts of its pilots. Museums and aircraft collectors preserve examples of the Lightning around the world. Many of these restored aircraft still fly in air shows, captivating generations who never witnessed the battles of the Pacific. I always get emotional seeing these gleaming metal machines in the sky, remembering that, decades ago, they were instruments of war, but also symbols of hope and strategy for the Allies. Of course, these planes represented terror, but for us, they are a living reminder of what courage and technology can achieve. Furthermore, the P-38 continues to inspire war films, games, and literature. Its twin silhouette, powerful engines, and nickname Ghost have created such an iconic identity that it transcends generations. I like to think that, in studying or admiring the Lightning today, we are connected with the living history of the Second World War, understanding the fear, respect, and admiration it generated. It's not just about battles and victories. It's about how an airplane can symbolize everything that is extraordinary in engineering, strategy, and human courage. The ghost of the skies remains an icon of legend, but also a reminder of the cost and heroism of war. Each story, each tribute, each restored aircraft transports us back to those Pacific skies, where daring pilots faced the impossible. And it is precisely this mixture of myth, memory, and reality that makes the P-38 Lightning so special. One of the most fascinating aircraft in aviation history. We've reached the end of our journey through the world of the P-38 Lightning, the legendary ghost of the skies. During this video, we explored its innovative engineering, the extraordinary skill of its pilots, the tactics that confused the enemy, and even the psychological impact it had on Japanese forces. The P-38 was not just a fighter. It was a living legend, a combination of human courage, cutting-edge technology, and strategies that marked the history of World War II. As I revisit all these accounts and stories, I'm always impressed by how an airplane can become so iconic, to the point of inspiring generations of pilots and aviation enthusiasts. Every dive, every attack, every long mission over the Pacific shows that the Lightning was more than just metal and engines. It was a symbol of ingenuity, audacity, and perseverance. If you enjoyed following this journey through the skies of World War II, subscribe to the channel. WW2 Pilots here. We will continue to explore incredible stories, historical facts, and little-known curiosities about the aviators and machines that shaped the most intense conflicts in history. Each video is designed to make you feel the tension, emotion, and grandeur of these missions as if you were right there with the pilots. And it doesn't stop here. In the next video, we'll travel to a completely different, but equally fascinating world. We will take a tour of farms and ranches, exploring its history, techniques, and secrets that will surprise even the most curious. Just as we did with the P-38, you will discover impressive details and stories you never imagined about life in the countryside. Then click on sign up, turn on notifications, and come with me on this next adventure. Because here in WW2 Pilots, each story is a unique journey, and each video is an opportunity to learn and marvel at the extraordinary. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. This time, between fields, pastures, and ranches, where new stories and curiosities await you.